Okay, this is lesson 77, and we're talking about percents greater than 100. So a percent less than 100% means part of the whole. So a fractional part, like if you have 50% of something, you have half of it. So it's not the whole thing, it's part of it. But if you have a percent that's more than 100, like 150% or 175% or 200%, then you're talking about more than the whole thing. All right, so a percent greater than 100 means even more than the whole thing. For example, if you have a parking lot that has 80 spaces and you say that the parking lot is 60% full, then it means that part of it is full, but some of it is still left over. If it's 100% full, it means the whole thing is full. If it's over 100% full, like 120% full, that means that you had to add some spaces to it. So it's even more cars than that parking lot that holds 80 cars could hold. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. We're looking at situations where we're talking about a percentage that's more than the whole thing. All right, so 210% of 50, all right, if you say 210% of 50, that means 210% times 50, all right? And you can write 210% as a fraction, like 210 over 100. Remember that percent means per 100. And then multiply that by 50 over 1. If you do that and cancel this, you're going to have 210 over 2, which is 105. So that's the number that is 210% of 50, because it's not just part of 50, it's even more than 50. 200% means double. Okay, so it's 100, 50 is doubled is 100, and then it's 10 more percent even than that. So 210% means another 10%, so that's 105%. So really, all you have to do is multiply it by whatever percent you're talking about, and if it's a percent bigger than 100, it's just going to come out to be bigger than the number you started with. All right, so what percent of 40 is 60? All right, so you just write this as an equation, just like we have been doing. So when it says what percent, you don't know, so you say x. Of means multiply. 40 is 60. All right, now you divide both sides by 40 to get x by itself. So x is going to be 60 over 40, and that is equal to 6/4, which is equal to 3/2. But that is not a percent. All right, and this question says what percent? So we need to change it to a percent. 3/2, if we want it to be a percent, we want the denominator to be 100, or, well, I'll tell you that in a second. If you want to do it with a fraction, 2 goes into 100 50 times, so 50 times 3 is 150, so that's 150%. Or you could change 3.2 to a fraction, to a decimal. 3.2 is 1.5, and then you just move that decimal 2 to the right to change it to a percent, 150%. So either way, you're going to get the same answer. You can change it to a decimal if you want to, or you can use it as a fraction. You should know how to write any fraction as a decimal, as a percent. You've been doing those little tables, so you should know how to do that. All right, so, and you should expect this to be greater than 100%, because it's asking you what percent of 40 is 60. Well, 60 is bigger than 40, so it's going to be more than 100% of 40. Next one says 150% of what number is 300. So we're going to write this as an equation. 150% of means multiply. What number, x, is 300? All right, so now we're going to want to divide both sides by 150%. And again, you can do this with fractions. You can do it with decimals. It doesn't matter. But if we divide both sides by 150%, so we can get x by itself, remember that percent, If you have 150%, that's going to be 1.5. So 300 divided by 1.5, and let me get this other stuff out of the way here now. So 300 divided by 1.5, you could do that as a division problem. So 1.5, you got to move that decimal 1 to the right. Put it in your answer. 15 goes into 32 times, so that's 200 is your answer. 200, 150% of 200 is 300, right? 150% means the whole thing plus another 50%. 50% of 200 will be 100. So 200 plus another 100 is 300. So 150% of 200 is 300. All right, next one. Jane is mad because today crawlers cost 120% of what they did 2 years ago. All right, so she's upset because crawlers are more expensive. So what does a crawler that was 60 cents 2 years ago cost today? So the first thing you should tell yourself is, okay, my answer is going to be more than 60 cents because we're talking about how much they cost now, and she's upset because they cost more. And you also look at that percentage and you know that's going to be more than what I start with. 120% means the whole thing plus another 20%. All right, so the crawlers, their cost is 120% of what they cost 2 years ago. So I'll use what they got, I'll just say 2 years ago. I'll use Y for that. All right, so I'm just going to fill in the information I have. I'm trying to figure out how much it costs now, and that's 120% of what it cost 2 years ago, which is 60 cents. So 60 cents. I can use fractions, I can use decimals. 120% is, if you write it as a fraction, it's going to be 120 over 100, because percent means per 100. And then if you multiply that by 60 over 1, you can cancel a 0 here. You can cancel a factor of 2 with the 6 and the 10. So you're going to end up with 360 over 5, which is going to be 72 cents. So that is lesson 77. We'll move on to lesson 78. Now we're talking about opposites. Two numbers which are on either side of the origin, the same distance away from 0, I should have said, same distance away from 0, are called opposites. So the numbers 2 and -2 are a pair of opposites. So when we use the word opposite, we're talking about additive opposites, meaning that they're just two numbers that have opposite signs, but the same magnitude or the same distance from 0. So -2 means the opposite of 2. So instead of saying the word negative, it's often very helpful in all kinds of algebraic situations to say the opposite of. All right, so if we have several minus signs in front of a number, it's helpful to think of each one as the opposite of. So -2 is the opposite of 2. -2, instead of saying -2, which doesn't make much sense, you can say -2 is the opposite of 2. All right, so what that means is if you're at 2 and you go to the opposite of 2 over here, and then you take the opposite of 2, that puts you back over here. So in this case, you end up at 2 because it's the opposite of 2. It's the opposite of 2, which puts you back at 2. The opposite of the opposite of the opposite of 2, all right, in that case, you're going the opposite of 2, but you're taking the opposite of that, and then you're taking the opposite of that. So you end up back on the left side. So whenever you put another negative sign in front of a number, you're bouncing back and forth between these two numbers. The opposite of that, the opposite of that, the opposite of that. So you're just bouncing back and forth across the origin. Well, The question is, where do you end up? Do you end up on the right side of 0 or on the left side of 0? Is this thing positive or is it negative? Well, it's easy to figure out because all you have to do is count the number of minus signs in front of the number, that is to the left of the number. And if it's an even number of negative signs, you'll have a positive value. If it's an odd number of negative signs, you'll have a negative value, right? So up here, when you have negative 2, that's 2 negative signs, and so that's even, and so that's going to be a positive 2 for your answer. When you have here negative 2, that's 3 negative signs, that's odd, so you're going to get negative 2. When you have negative 2, right here, you're going to have 4 of them, that's even, so it's going to be positive 2. So all you have to do is notice whether the number of negative signs is even or whether it's odd. If it is even, you'll get a positive number. If it's odd, you'll get a negative number. And that's all there is to lesson 78. All right, lesson 79, simplifying more complex notations. Remember, when we do algebraic addition, we are just taking all the numbers we have, adding them all together, making sure to put the correct sign to the left of each number. So whatever sign is there in front of that number, that's the sign that number gets. So in this problem right here, you've got negative 4, that's your first number, plus positive 2, that's your second number, plus negative 5, third number, plus negative 7. All right, and remember when we did this before, we just grouped the positive numbers together. Well, there's just one, that's 2. And then we just grouped the negative numbers together and add them up. So 2 plus all these negatives, negative 4, negative 5, negative 7, adds up to negative 16. And so when you add 2 plus a negative 16, remember you take the difference of the two numbers, their absolute values, and then you put the sign on the one that has the biggest absolute value. So negative 14 is going to be the answer to that. And I don't know why my circles got moved here, but they did. All right, so here is a more complex example. So you've got this example here, and this one has all these extra negative signs in it. So again, you're going to think of this as just all addition, and you're going to look at each number and see what signs are in front of that number. So this first 4 here has 2 negative signs in front of it, which is even. So that's going to be positive 4. I'm just going to rewrite it there. All right, and then the second thing you have, it has a positive sign and a negative sign in front of it, so that's going to be negative. So that'll be negative 2. And then the last thing you have here is this 6 that has a positive and 2 negatives in front of it. So that is going to be 2 negatives is even, so that's going to be a positive 6. All right, so when you add these numbers together, you add the 2 positive numbers first. 4 and 6 is 10, and then negative 2, 10 plus negative 2 is just going to be 8. All right, so let's just look at this next example. The first thing you have here, the 4 has a positive and a negative sign in front of it, so just one negative makes it a negative 4. The 5 has 2 negative signs in front of it, so that makes it, that's even. 2 is even, so that's a positive 5. The next 5 is also positive, it just has a plus sign in front of it. And then the 3 here has 2 minus signs in front of it, so that makes it, that's even, so it makes it a positive 3. And then the 6 just has a positive and a negative sign in front of it. It just has one negative, so that's odd, so it is a negative number, so negative 6. All right, so now you can look at your positive numbers here. That's going to be 13. And your negative numbers, negative 6 and negative 4, would be negative 10. So you've got 13 plus negative 10 will give you 3. All right, the next one over here, you can look at this first thing. You've got this 3 that has 2 negative signs in front of it. That's an even number of negative signs, so it is positive. Then you have a 2 that has 3 negative signs in front of it, so that's odd, which means that's going to be a negative 2. And then last of all, you have this 3, which has a positive, 2 negatives. 2 negative signs make, that's even, so it makes it a positive 3. So now you can add your positives, that's 6, and then add your negative. So 6 plus negative 2, or 6 minus 2, is 4. All right. So here we're going to go ahead and simplify these a little bit more in our heads. We don't have to write all these parentheses and take all this time. So here you've got negative and negative 4. 2 negatives makes a positive. Here you have a positive and a negative. That means that's minus 2. Here you have 3 negatives in front of the 6, which means it's negative. So now you can just do this out. You've got a positive 4 and a negative 2 and a negative 6. So that's 4 minus 8, which is negative 4. All right, the next one, you've got a 4 with a positive and a negative in front of it. That's just one negative sign, which means it is negative. Then you have this 5 with 2 negative signs to the left of it, so that is even, so it's positive 5. You have another positive 5. You have 2 negatives in front of the 3, so that's positive 3. And then you have just one negative sign in front of the 6, so that is minus 6. So this is going to be positive 13 plus negative 10, so minus 10 is 3.